What's up, folks? How's things out there in Slacksonville? It's your boy Jack Slack, and we're doing a rather informal podcast this week. Doing it on a Monday morning because I'm heading out traveling to the States later in the week. So I figured let's do it early. Might not have as much news to laugh at, but at least we've got an event to recap. I'm going to have some moral outrage, which I know you all enjoy. And it's not a Bellator this time. And we've got some other stuff to talk about. I think we're going to do a little eulogy for Medeiros before we start. But and then, of course, we've got this amazing UFC 218 card coming up at the end of the week, which I'm planning to get 3 articles out on this week. So peepers on fightprimer.com, and it'll show you where they've gone, or where I've published them, rather. But before we start, one of the interesting things that's happened this weekend, in fact, happened last night, was Medeiros. I believe it must be Medeiros 8, but it's sort of informally done, Medeiros. Took place at one of the Gracie academies, I believe Rorion Gracie's, because he's Halleck's dad. And it's interesting. Someone put up a side-by-side picture, which I've since tweeted out, of either Medeiros 1 or 2, maybe 3, and Medeiros current, the one that was happening yesterday. And it's really sad to look at them side by side. Now, it's crazy to think about this, but Medeiros has been going since 2012, back in October. But if you never saw their cards, their first few were downright incredible. The idea was that it was submission only, and they did exclusively super fights, where EBI is often built around a tournament. Obviously, a lot of draws result from that, but you got to see an exciting style of grappling, and you got to see some of the guys who are world-class under points, struggle a little bit with the switch over to no points. I mean, the first Medeiros was largely built around the publicity stunt of having Hyon Gracie, or Hyon, whichever one he is, have a match with Andre Galvao, and just sort of turtle up on the bottom and not offer him any opportunities to submit him, and Galvao, being very much a points player, just rode him for 20 minutes. And that was one of those classic Gracie moral victories. Less than 2 years later, when Eddie Bravo styles all over Royler Gracie, they're going on about how on their Gracie breakdown, they're going on about how the lockdown is doesn't pass the Gracie filter because you could get hit from the bottom of the lockdown. Meanwhile, it's all right for Hyon Gracie to be under Neon Belly for the best part of 10 minutes. But that's them. They're very good at selling a product, especially Henna. In fact, Henna was on commentary for, I believe, 1 and 2, and then maybe one of the later ones. That guy got so much charisma. But the first Medeiros card, you had Caio Terra versus Jeff Glover in like a grudge match. You had Rafael Lovato Jr. versus Kron Gracie. Kron Gracie turned up against Otavio Souza. I believe that was before they met at ADCC. Sanjay Ribeiro versus Dean Lister. What a great match that was. I believe that's the one where he almost broke his arm, and Dean Lister was turning away from it. Because apparently if you raise the shoulder, you're actually taking the point of the fulcrum of the lever higher up and removing pressure. Or some shit like that. I saw him demonstrate it in a seminar once. And then you had Andre Galvao versus Hyon. And the main event was Roger Gracie versus Marcus Almeida, Buchecha. And that was the one that went to the draw, where Buchecha berimboloed him at one point. And for years there was this debate over this fight because Roger looked so bad. Well, he got the draw, but he looked very bad. But then all the people supporting Roger were like, oh, he was ill. He had a 150-degree temperature the night before and all that. And then finally, like this year, they had the rematch, and Roger won it in classic Roger fashion, but sort of out of nowhere. It was very cool. Second card, they had just as many names: Mackenzie Dern versus Michelle Nicolini. That's a super fight anyway you look at it. Cyborg versus Schaub. How can we go through Medeiros history without talking about Cyborg versus Schaub, where Brendan Schaub turned up and gave him the old Schaubby shutdown. Brendan Schaub training with Henna and Hyon, so very much in the business of getting the Gracie moral victory. Schaub turns up for a grappling match against the very respected Cyborg Abreu, master of the Tornado Guard and all that stuff. And proceeds to run from him and do nothing for the entire match. Sprawling on his takedown attempts, granted, but then Cyborg just sits guard and Brendan does nothing. And then in the post-match press conference, he goes, well, I knew his game was grappling, so I shut down his game by not grappling. It's amazing. And of course, it was just the most awful fight match of any sort you've ever seen. We had, Rodolfo Vieira versus Braulio Estima, Andre Galvao versus Lovato Jr., JT Torres versus Victor Estima. Amazing matches on that one too. And Medeiros 2 was, of course, headlined by that Kron Gracie versus Shinya Aoki match. The one where Kron hits his classic guillotine as Aoki's trying to pass the guard, and Aoki's feet roll off the mat. And rather than push him back on, they just let him get tapped out there where he can't actually try and do anything because he's got nothing to push off. Always a little bit of controversy going on in the background of Medeiros, but that's anything with that branch of the Gracie's names on. Of course, Jorge and Gracie sued his own family at one point, I believe. Medeiros 3 was just as good. That was probably the best one right up till then. I believe that was the first one that I watched live with friends. But that was the one headlined by Eddie Bravo versus Hoyler Gracie, which was absolutely amazing. These two old guys, Hoyler almost 50, Eddie Bravo 45, and they turn up and they put on this barn burner of a match. Mostly Eddie, we'll be honest. But it was just great because Eddie Bravo spent his whole career being like that guy who had the one big victory. And in that same tournament, where he submitted Hoyler Gracie, he went on to lose one of the biggest points losses in ADCC history against Leo Vieira, because Leo Vieira just passed his guard over and over again. But it was just really cool to see him come back and train properly for it. He did say he was never an athlete, but we put in the time swimming and doing shark tanks at Jean-Jacques' place. And he had Jean-Jacques Machado in his corner, which was really sweet that they've still got such a good relationship, even though Eddie Bravo is very much no-gi only. But yeah, he turned up, and all that weird shit that he put in Mastering the Rubber Guard and Jiu-Jitsu Unleashed even before that, books from the early 2000s, that everyone was like, yep, flash in the pan, doesn't work. It came back and used it all again to beat Hoyler Gracie. And the thing about the Gracie Bravo fights is that the first one, the Rubber Guard didn't really play much of a role. The only thing that was really unusual that caught Hoyler out was the jailbreak escape, which you'll remember from BJ Penn GSP. Jailbreak escape back to Butterfly Guard, used the overhook Butterfly Guard sweep, Jean-Jacques Machado style stuff, very, not classical because it was still new in ADCC back then, but very, what we would call traditional jiu-jitsu now, as opposed to all the weird Rubber Guard shit, which is still weird Rubber Guard shit, and then he hit the triangle off that. But the rematch comes on and, he just styles all over him with the lockdown and the electric chair sweep and all sorts of variations on that, stoner sweep, stoner control, vaporizer, all those things that have ridiculous names that the name actually doesn't tell you what it is. But then there's always been an argument for that, if your training guys have your own names for shit. Like Customato, who we'll briefly touch on later because the next history episode's about him and I'm loving reading about him at the moment. But yeah, that event was absolutely stunning. Medeiros 4, Rise of Gary Tonin. Gary Tonin submits Kit Dale with that guillotine in 3 minutes. Headlined by Galvao versus Chael Sonnen, which was obviously just cashing in on Chael Sonnen's name value, because he's never been a great grappler, really. He's a guy who spends his entire time in the guard and gets submitted a lot, so it doesn't really work out that well. But he turned up to ADCC this year, actually, and Craig Jones submitted him with a heel hook. But he does have amazing takedowns, because immediately he comes out, and I think he hit a low single on Galvao, and Galvao had no resistance, just straight through him. But that one, there was the one with the secret match, obviously, Barrett Rashida versus Jeff Glover, who was on commentary and then stripped down to spats under his suit, which was pretty cool. And that was the birth of the Donkey Guard, and everyone lost their shit. And then the co-main was Dean Lister versus Josh Barnett, which was, I believe, for some kind of heavyweight belt that they invented. But that was really where Josh Barnett came out as... Well, I mean, he'd won a gi championship of some sort and been given a black belt in the gi, but that's really where he came out as a really incredible world-class grappler. Such a great match and such an interesting style. Always one of my boys. Might be listening, so love Josh Barnett. But I always wish that he'd do more submission grappling. Medeiros 5 is probably the last really good Medeiros, because you got Gary Tonin versus Zach Maxwell, which was a great match. Matthias Deniz versus Vinny Magalhaes, amazing. Yuri Samosh versus Keenan Cornelius. Jake Shields versus Roberto Satoshi, which was a secret match, which is even cooler. And then Rory McDonald versus JT Torres, which was awesome. And the whole event was built around Sakuraba versus Gracie, which was never going to be that great. And it turned out to not be that great either. So it's just this whole thing where you've got to use the old stars. It's exactly the same thing that fighting in general is falling into now. But that was like the last good one, because after that, you know, you had like Josh Barnett having to defend his title against Hyan Gracie, who stepped in at like the last minute. It's half Josh Barnett's size, you know, so Josh really easily toe-holed him or whatever it was from reverse mount. And then Medeiros 7 was just sort of like a sad one, because it was Halleck had stopped paying the athletes, which is the thing going on in the background of all of this, was that Halleck was always being accused of being shit at paying athletes. In fact, it was AJ Azagam who, I believe he took over the Metamoris Instagram account and started posting about how Halleck didn't pay his athletes. It all got very ugly, and Halleck came back this year to announce that he was going to MMA to pay the debts of the athletes that he'd not paid, which he then didn't do, after having that god-awful match with Hisaki Kato. Because Bellator will fucking hire anyone. Halleck's career up to that point in MMA had been just scraping past Kazushi Sakuraba, who was 40, 50 years old at the time. So the Metamoris events became a bit of a joke. The one just before this one was headlined by Gary Tonin, big name, versus Halleck Gracie. Doesn't have to pay anyone to take that spot. So this one the other night was Gordon Ryan, big name, against Halleck Gracie. Doesn't have to pay anyone to take that spot. Reportedly, not seen any video of it so far, but apparently Gordon Ryan played with him for 10 minutes, having bet on himself to win by armbar or triangle in the 11th minute. But if you've seen the pictures of the event, it's tragic. He's just holding it in his dad's academy. And really, it just goes to show how you can make an amazing event that everyone says is amazing and still not manage the money side of it. Well, look at Affliction. They did 3 incredible events, but then a positive drug test by my boy Josh Barnett tanked the whole thing. Probably because they were paying Fedor his multi-million-dollar asking price. So was Strikeforce. So a Bellator. Anyway, if you've not seen any of the Metamoris events, I highly recommend finding them in a way where you don't have to pay Halleck Gracie a penny. Ones to watch are Eddie Bravo versus Hoyler, both of Josh Barnett's matches, though the second one not that interesting, but Josh Barnett making Dean List a tap for the first time in 10 years or something like that is incredible. Any Gary Tonin, but then Gary Tonin's mainly an EBI guy. That's where he's made his name. And it really gives you a new appreciation for Eddie Bravo and what he's done with EBI. Obviously, he's not paying, he's not promising to pay guys big money to get in, to bring them in. He's offering them money if they get submissions and wins. But it's proving to be a better business model, at least. Certainly no one is coming away and then making a scene saying that they were promised money and not given it. Of course, the downside of Eddie Bravo's business model is that they keep... Well, no, not so much nowadays, but they were announcing these huge names for the tournament. Like, I believe they had Galvao and Abreu in at one point for one of their tournaments, and both just said, nope, not doing it now, partly because the money's only there if you get the submissions, and also because gi and no-gi seasons exist in Brazil. You can't train for a no-gi tournament during the gi portion of the year where everyone at the academy is training for gi. Or certainly it's a lot harder to. But anyway, R.I.P. Metamoris, fuck you Halleck Gracie, and let's talk about that card in China, which wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So this was the UFC's first visit to mainland China, which I didn't know, but then when I think about it, it makes sense. They've been to Macau a few times. Macau, obviously, gambling haven just off China. But this was their first time on the mainland in Shanghai, the most polluted city in the world, one of at least. And this was a baffling decision to put Michael Bisping in the main event. I mean, I've been moaning about it for 2 weeks. I was about to say 2 years. I was moaning about it for 2 weeks beforehand, saying this is weird. I don't like this, him going in immediately after his medical suspension. Turns out, gets starched badly, which, even if you think Kelvin would have won, and I do think Kelvin probably would have beaten him any other time if they booked it down the road. Still not good to be getting one possible concussion, well, almost guaranteed concussion, getting knocked down by GSP, and then elbowed on the floor and giving up your back. And then another guaranteed concussion by getting knocked out cold by a left hand. And then hit on the ground too. Within 20 days. And it's not. The other thing is that most suspensions for like a knockout or a bad knockdown will come with like a period of no contact. Or if you clearly suffered a concussion, they'll try and give you a period of no contact, which is like, please don't spar during this period. That would be stupid. Michael Bisping went from getting dropped by GSP straight into sparring for another fight and then fighting. I really didn't like that. But then I thought about it more, and what was the point? The tickets were already sold. The tickets say card liable to change. This event wasn't a pay-per-view. They weren't selling it to anyone outside of Shanghai. So what they did was they took one of their very few proven pay-per-view stars, a guy who even against Dan Henderson drew about 400,000 buys, which is way more than a lot of the cards this year have drawn. Can't snort at that anymore. And drew over 1 million buys against GSP. He was half of that equation. And they put him into a fight with zero build-up, where he added no pay-per-view buys, and he got knocked out. That's the worst business I could possibly think of. And then we wonder why the UFC is having such a shit year. They're just sort of throwing everything at the wall, and at a certain point you do have to protect your big stars in that, you know, not protect them as in give them patsies, but make sure if they're going to lose, people are going to pay as much money as possible to watch them lose. That's how the whole fight business works. People aren't tuning in to watch Floyd Mayweather win, they're tuning in hoping he'll lose, but you get like 2-3 months of build-up to that each time. Absolutely bizarre decision. Really bizarre. And then the whole fighting within your medical suspension thing, fucking reprehensible. But at any rate, I wrote an article for Vice, got it into them too late, so they couldn't publish it. I basically just said I think Kelvin gets in too quick, and then when Bisping opens up, he tends to dangle his right hand, especially after throwing his right hand. Lo and behold, overhand left sends him to the mat. Interestingly, GSP had said that he reckons that Bisping had a blind spot on that side, though that was like the first left hook he threw in the entire fight in the third round, so who knows. But yeah, really bad knockout. Great for Kelvin, but equally not great for Kelvin, because anyone who looks at this win and knows the sport, and if you're watching the Ultimate Fighting Championship Shanghai on Fight Pass at whatever time Up With the Sparrows fart, you're going to know that Michael Bisping just fought and just got knocked down, and you're probably quite concerned about it. So that's now an asterisk in your head on Kelvin Gastelum's big win. And the thing about Kelvin Gastelum is that he's been picking up all these big name wins over guys who are well past it anyway. So, you know, I like Kelvin Gastelum a lot. You know, I was rewatching his fight with Tyron Woodley the other day, and he was within a hair's breadth of beating the current welterweight champion in a close competitive match where not much happened. But I reckon he can beat the welterweight champion on any given night, and I reckon he could probably give the actual middleweight champion, Robert Whittaker, a good fight. Someone pointed this out the other day. 3 of the top middleweights now, GSP, if you include him as a top middleweight based on his one fight at middleweight, Kelvin Gastelum and Robert Whittaker are all essentially what we would consider welterweights. They've come from the welterweight class. One of them's been forced to fight at middleweight because he can't get his fucking act in order. One of them just said, okay, I'm going to move up and not have to cut weight. And then the third one came back and took the money fight. But they all got their different ways, and they are all now doing very well in the weight class, objectively, despite being undersized. And this is amid the era of Jacare and Yoel and all these guys who were like, God, they're so strong and big at the at middleweight and terrifying. So that's interesting. But then Robert Whittaker's been taking care of all the really scary middleweights. No one else has to fight them. So other interesting stuff from this card, and you know, before this card I was like, there are a lot of blank faces on this card. A lot of people I've not heard of. Are these all just jabronis? No, like the Chinese portion of this card, the Chinese fighters on this card did an amazing job, I thought. And when I said last week, I closed with the remark, I hope someone does some crazy kung fu shit. That might be a little bit racist, but I still do. They actually did, so that's pretty cool. I mean, the thing in China that we've had trouble with, if you've been following this whole MMA coach over there fighting the Tai Chi guy and challenging people, if you've been following all that, you'll notice that the government is still really interested in promoting kung fu because it is like a cultural heritage and all that. And the thing with MMA is that it has always been the way you can't really do it over there, it seems, so far, is the way that we do it over here, which is where you say, oh my god, look at that silly kung fu stuff, come and fight me, and I'll take you down. It doesn't seem to work over there. I think the way that you're going to sell it to the Chinese is to have guys who can do flashy spinning shit in an MMA context. There are a few guys who at least looked like they had good Sanshao backgrounds on this, or Sander, whichever one you want to call it, on this card. Kung Lee obviously did very well in Macau, and is very much that sort of fighter, flashy Sanshao style. Sanshao has done very well because it is... Well, if you look at Sanshao, it's wrestling and kickboxing. If you learn some wrestling and kickboxing and then got up in some traditional martial artist's face and were like, yeah, I could kick your ass, that's one way of doing it. But what Sanshao is going like, okay, so we're really like Kung Fu, but we're a contact version, as opposed to calling them out for not doing contact, So I think you've got to nuance the Chinese market, and I think guys like Song Yadong and who was the other one? Song Kenan? Yeah. They're fantastic for that. Li Jianliang, who's in the co-main, they're going to do wonders for this. Maybe not Li Jianliang, because he's a little bit more wrestle-bangery. But Song Yadong is the one that I'm really thinking of, stood out in this. The women's fights were a little bit meh, just lots of grinding on the cage. But Song Yadong versus Barrett Kandare, really liked that. That lad, Song Yadong. And if you can convince a nice young lady to Song Yadong, you're doing very well. But racist joke number 1. I was looking at the Ofcom list of banned words, and I realised that they're in categories like insults to people with mental disabilities and things like that, insults to different sexual orientations, insult by race. I realised never touched the race ones, never touched the sexual connotation ones, but I do call people window lickers and shit all the time, and apparently that's like top of the Ofcom list. Can't say it. Bellend is worse than shit. Let that sink in for a moment. So now I'm just going to resort to calling people a gland. You're a gland, mate. Where were we? Song Kinon. No, Song Yadong. So he fought this guy Barrett Kandare, and people were immediately asking me what I thought of Song Yadong, and I loved it. But I was also alarmed at this other lad striking. He immediately goes for an overhand, which he drew back and almost hit the cage behind him doing. And then he went for like a spinning wheel kick or back fist or some shit. It looked like when Tatsuya Kawajiri or Dong Hyun Kim decided, hey, yeah, I learnt the spinning back fist and now I am an excellent striker. But his striking was horrible. But Song Yadong was great. Like, he was trying to wheel kick and back kick when the guy circled towards that side. He was using a beautiful right hand counter, which again, is it Song Kinan or have I written the same name down twice? The guy who knocked out Bobby Nash, same thing. Just that right hand immediately after the jab. Beautiful counter. So they were great. Loved them. Li Jianliang, very quick knockout of Zach Otto. The Chase Sherman one was messy as fuck. Very quick stoppage there. Actually, the Bobby Nash one was pretty funny because he got kicked low and then went glove touch and tried to double jab in off the glove touch and immediately ate the right hand counter. But, brilliant reactions by that lad. And then Zabit Magomed Shapirov, who we said was the guy to watch on this card, just went all over Shaman Moraes. But there was a little bit of that Hayato Sakurai stuff that we talked about in the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix episode. Get on Patreon now. But, we talked about when you're that rounded and that confident, there is this thing where you will start putting yourself in silly positions just because you feel like you can get out of them. He did exactly what Hayato Sakurai did. He tried a hip throw and took himself straight into the bottom of mount. And Hayato Sakurai could get away with that with almost everyone, but Takanori Gomi immediately took his back and hammered him in the back of the head 150 times or whatever it was, and then let him up, and Hayato Sakurai was just swaying all over the place, waiting to get knocked out. Little mistakes. Guys will make you pay for them. But at this level, it's like Yair Rodriguez. Someone was saying to me, like, I've never seen a fighter as rounded as Zabit. And you're like, well, steady on. Let's see, when he's beaten some more guys. Yair Rodriguez, back when he was flying kicking people in Mexico City and retching after the fight because he'd used so much energy in the fight, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that. I'm not Hoist Gracie after the Eddie Bravo match. You used too much strength, so you lost. But I am saying that, you know, it took us a while to see what he was made of, because as soon as he started having to box more extensively, you realised that his hands were awful. And then, you know, when Frankie Edgar put him on his back and put him by the cage, you realised that all his work off his back is about trying to submit the guy, and he can't actually wall walk up very well. So, you know, we'll have to wait and see what Zabit's made of. But there were some really cool moments in this one. He did like some kind of flying shit or spinning shit, and then he immediately went into that step in a Sotogari cross buttock style throw. The one Akiyama hit on Jake Shields, missed it, and then immediately went into the hip throw attempt. Just tons of cool stuff like that. And then the Anaconda choke to finish, I believe. Was it Anaconda or a Das? I think it was an Anaconda. But yeah, he's so long at that weight class that he could just lock that up from directly in front of the guy if he wanted to, and he did, you know. So very cool. But again, I'm now sort of at the point where I'm like, bring him up a bit. I want to see him fight with guys with Wikipedia pages. So not at all a bad event. Didn't think that it was bad at all. I hope the Chinese enjoyed it, and who knows, maybe we will get an exciting new market out of it. The only downside, of course, is that Michael Bisping effectively got knocked unconscious within, 20 days of getting knocked down in a pro fight and beaten up for nothing. No additional tickets were sold, probably a couple of hundred additional tickets were sold, but it happened so near to the time of the fight. These things sell out so soon anywhere that's not the mainland United States. Just baffling. Anyway, let's do some questions. Going rapid fire from the Facebook today. I did say we were keeping it informal. Chris said, did you see the fixed fight at Infusion Kickboxing? It's hilariously bad. Yes, it is hilariously bad. Just trying to remember what happened in it. The guy that they wanted to win got knocked down, and then the referee stumbled around for like 30 seconds before he started counting for the guy. Then the fight resumed, and the guy was clearly out of it. And just as he was about to get finished, they jumped in and were like, no, end of the round, mate, end of the round. And then, when it was pretty clear that the guy had been TKO'd, they decided they were going to disqualify the guy who TKO'd him for a late shot, which I don't believe happened, even watching the film. So, yeah, pretty fucking awful. But, kickboxing is a rinky-tink sport at the moment. Even Glory is fairly small time, and Bellator kickboxing is also fairly small time. It's you're always going to have these things because the promoter is always going to be also the manager of one of the guys. Connor says, concerning your book on Conor McGregor, did anyone from SBG let you know their thoughts on it? Yeah, I got a few followers from SBG Dublin, or Ireland rather. Yeah, good lads, seem to enjoy it. I mean, my thoughts aren't particularly controversial. I just give it both sides. I say, here's what he's done that's unique. Here's why people maybe don't like him. He hasn't defended any titles. He hasn't done this, that, and the other. Some people seem to think that I wrote a book just fluffing Conor McGregor. You can go and read like half of it on Google Books. It's pretty even-handed, and it's probably the best MMA book yet written. By me, at least. Ian says, Ngannou versus Overeem. Oh, no, we'll get onto this in a minute, son. Don't worry. Harry says, when are you going to brand your dong? And will it be on pay-per-view? This is when did I say this? Oh, he's got a screenshot. That's helpful. If they don't try to feed Chael to Fedor in the first round of the tourney, I'll UFC hot dog brand my dong. That does sound like something I'd say, but I was not talking about my dong. I was talking about your dong. Song your dong. No, the day that happened, the day I said that, they announced that Chael wasn't going to be fighting Fedor, which seems like should be an obvious one because Fedor brings in the weebs. Chael brings in the people who like the trash talk, and Chael will trash talk up the least trash talky fighter in the tournament, and he'll give Fedor the guaranteed win almost. He's not going to knock anyone out. He's Chael Sonnen. But they decided to do it a different way, whereby they're going to get a few of their favourites to the final the other way. I don't know, but it seems weird that they didn't give Fedor the easiest fight by giving him the middleweight with no punching power. But anyway, immediately after that, I said that the UFC hot dog brand went on sale, so someone from the team must have been reading it. Jake says, does David Luceau get an honourable mention in the best bows category? He's not from a bowing culture. If you do that in French Canada, they'll hit you over the head and take your stuff. Use it to buy poutine. Chris says, in between his 12 meals a day, who is the next elderly middleweight they should feed Kelvin Guest? I'm glad everyone's noticing this now. Fight some fucking real middleweights now, because Bobby Whittaker's been running through him. Make a rematch with Uriah Hall. Why not? Hazu says, how do you like Kelvin's chances against GSP? He seems to have trouble with short dudes with good wrestling and fast hands. Example, Hendricks, Serra, Hughes. Oh, GSP does. I was like, when the fuck did Kelvin Gastelum fight Matt Serra and Matt Hughes? I like it. GSP doesn't really like the southpaws as much either. If they got a good lead hand and they hand fight with him and take away his jab. I just wonder... because Nick Diaz was doing a very good job of getting to his hands and knees and trying to get up. And we talked about this, like hands and knees or turtling and then referee's position, whatever you want to call it, getting on your base. Generally better against GSP than being on your back because he'll keep you there and keep hitting you. Any moment you're on your back against GSP is losing the battle. If you're on your hands and knees, even if he's trying to take your back, at least you're not getting hit, generally, with the exception of that one knee that's awesome. I just, having seen Nick Diaz, he did manage to tire GSP by keep getting to his knees and make him keep him down. But, it was still 5 rounds and GSP did it with very little difficulty. What's your opinion on Sander in MMA, says Joe? Well, exactly what I just said. I think it's a big seller for the Chinese. Sander and Sanshao, generally quite interesting because it's not a very... Outside of China, it's not really a big deal. So, like, Kung Lee was fighting dudes who were just kickboxers with no background in any sort of, wrestling or anything. So he was just suplexing kickboxers, basically. If you've seen Kung Lee's career, with the exception of the couple of Chinese fighters he fought, which were impressive because they were actual Sanshao, competitors, he fought a lot of guys who were kickboxers making their debut in Sanshao. Kung Lee was fed a lot of softballs, is what I'm saying. Ben says, how do you think Michael Chandler would fare in the UFC? This is an interesting one because everyone wants to point to Will Brooks, who beat Michael Chandler. But again, this is MMA math, Big right hand, great wrestling. That's always going to be a powerful combination. And he's got a really good straight right hand too. He doesn't tend to overhand too much. I just want to see it, to be honest. At this point, I'm just bored of being like, what if? And I'd rather just actually get him over. But he's got to beat Brent Primus first, or get the rematch with Brent Primus. Tom says, not to be harsh to him, but if Joe Martinez is the announcer for the UFC you're attending, are you really getting the UFC show? I felt a little bad for the folks in Sydney who got themselves a cheap and cheerful version of the fight night for their money. And yet UFC Shanghai had Bruce Buffer as announcer, which I assume was to make the Chinese fans feel special. I mean, personally, I don't care. But, we all like our own things. I quite miss the pageantry of Pride. I enjoy the pageantry at Glory events. I will just say, WCW used to hire Michael Buffer for $250,000 a pop for their pay-per-views. And how many pay-per-view buys do you reckon he brought in? Yeah, exactly. The whole ring announcer thing is just a fantastic con anyway. In Las Vegas, you have to have a licensed ring announcer. What does it take to be a licensed ring announcer? You're just shouting into a microphone. Unless there's some kind of test you've got to do. And then Paracram says, thoughts on Whittaker representing Australia in the Commonwealth Games? Yes, this is in wrestling, if you missed it. I just love that guy. Throws himself fully into whatever he's doing. Best fighter in the world today. Not much more you can say. Any weight class. Suck it, DJ lovers. Right, let's talk about UFC 218 very briefly, and then we'll get out of here. But I've got articles coming in the week about this. But it's a good event. I mean, people are going to be put off by the rematch between Holloway and Aldo as the main event. I do believe Aldo's probably on the twilight of his career now. The latter end. But equally, Holloway was he was minding his P's and Q's religiously against Aldo. That was the best we've ever seen him easily. If you saw the first fight, foot positioning perfect, always in position where he made Aldo feel uncomfortable about the kicks, using the jab, using lots of feints, used the body jab against Aldo, which, one guy tried once and then everyone was like, no, he got kneed in the head because he really obviously showed what he was going to do. But Holloway jabbed him up and down beautifully, played with his expectations constantly, stepped in with the right hand on the one kick that Aldo did throw. Obviously, Aldo's been moving away from the kicks in recent years and focusing more on his boxing, but it's always important to take that weapon away, because if he finds that he can land it easily on the 1 or 2 times he does throw it, then he'll just keep going to it. And it's a serious switch-up going from Frankie Edgar to Jose Aldo, in terms of stature and, also ability, because Frankie Edgar is going to be always searching for the takedown. He's going to be trying to draw you into exchanges to get the takedown, whereas Jose Aldo is more of a counter fighter, likes to work his counter combinations and things like that, very into his boxing, has the ground game, but very rarely takes it there. But I think for Aldo, I would like to see him just bull rush to the clinch right off the bat. Just try and grind Holloway down. I mean, McGregor took him down all those years ago. We can't use that as like a... there's always those people who are like, well, I wouldn't care for a McGregor versus Holloway match 2 because McGregor beat him so convincingly the first time. And these are the people who are like, McGregor changes fight to fight. And you're like, well, does Holloway not? But, I think it'd be interesting to see Aldo go to his wrestling because he never does. He's got this... You see him throw guys to the mat easily when he catches them by surprise, but maybe if he actually went to it more regularly, he could start to actually build up a points lead and do some work on the ground because he has this amazing BJJ pedigree, which he very rarely uses. Ngannou versus Overeem, you know that they're putting all their eggs in the Ngannou basket. They desperately want to get that guy over. They invented a metric to measure his punching power so that he could be the most powerful person to ever be measured on that metric. And they gave the answer in units. It was 3 billion units was how much his punch was. Just nonsense. It's like when they go on sports science and they invent a new test to make every fighter the best in the world at whatever they're testing. Like when they had Conor McGregor react and do a spin kick when he was, and then they were like, oh, that's the quickest we've ever seen someone react and throw a spin kick on this test, which we've only done on the guy setting up the test and Conor McGregor. Oh god. Just everyone has to be absolute. Everyone has to be the absolute best at this, the absolute best at that. It gets really fucking old. Anyway, so Ngannou, the hardest puncher who ever lived, versus Overeem, the softest chin at heavyweight. However, Conor Reem, very good at managing the distance, and if you can drag the fight longer, limit the exchanges, definitely use the kicks. I mean, you get a good sense of the man, the measure of the man, when you see him eat a couple of good body kicks. And at heavyweight, a lot of them will just crumble. But we'll see. Ngannou's going to try and hit him as hard as he can. Overeem's going to try and... when Overeem's worried about being hit, sometimes he's amazing. Sometimes he does everything perfect and sticks to the game plan religiously. Other times he just looks terrified, like the Ben Rothwell fight, where he doesn't get anything going because he's almost frozen up. Alvarez versus Gage is going to be the best fight of the year, maybe. Or one of them could get starched very quickly, who knows. But I just love Justin Gage. Expect another Church of Gage episode if that fight is very good or if he wins. I mean... that guy should be a star. I can't believe that we're this close to the fight and they've not been pushing it super hard. Just put out the Michael Johnson fight. Just tell everyone how great that was. I mean, he is built for TV. It's not going to last. At some point, he's going to get starched and it's probably going to be diminishing returns. He's going to get knocked out more and more. But right now, he's the most exciting thing going in MMA. Against an old dog like Alvarez, who still, only just came off the loss of the title to Conor McGregor. If you're selling Conor McGregor as still the champion, it has been a year, but again, McGregor time is different. Tisha Torres versus Michelle Waterson, interesting enough. Tisha Torres came in so exciting and then just became very boring very quickly. And Michelle Waterson, they're desperate to push her again. Charles Oliveira versus Paul Felder, love that. Sleeper match of the night. Alex Oliveira versus Yancy Medeiros. Has Yancy done something lately? Because I seem to remember him being on a skid, and Alex Oliveira seems to just be getting better and better. And didn't Yancy used to be a lightweight? Well, I'll still watch it. Sounds good. Yancy Medeiros, beautiful front kicks. That performance against Eve Edwards is just one of the best. But we were talking about this in the history episode, the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix episode. Just very sad how Eve's late career went. But it was because we got our hopes up because of that Jeremy Stevens win, which was just sensational. But Yancy's had a rough time lately. And then Drakkar Klose, the man who, maybe not quite emphatically, in a split decision stopped the Mark Jacasey hype train, versus David Tamor. Everyone loves... In fact, I love both Tamors. They're very exciting fighters. Love them. So that's a bloody good fight card. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, I'll be writing more about it in the coming days, so keep your eyes on fightprimer.com. Sorry about the shorter podcast today, but as I said, I'm going travelling and I've got to get this all done early in the week. But we will have the new history episode going up soon, so if you want to get on Patreon to support the show, definitely do. It's going to be the Customato episode. Customato, fascinating guy. I mean, he started boxing when he was young. There's a really old photograph of him in like a classical boxing stance as a kid with the gloves on, looking like Benny Leonard or something. But he had a busted up right eye. by the time he was about 12. But then he got this ferocious reputation as a street fighter in his later teens and 20s. And presumably that's where he came up with the idea for the peekaboo, because the early photos of him don't show him doing it. So very interesting. The more I read about him, the more interesting he is. And the more I realise that he is also full of shit a lot of the time, but also has these amazing moments of insight. And of course, it's not just about custom art. We're talking about Floyd Patterson, his rivalry with Ingemar Johansson. So yeah, get on Patreon if you want to get in on those. Remember to bookmark thefightprimer.com, where I link all my work wherever it is, and occasionally drop the odd article there myself too. Send your emails to fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com, and I'll answer a good few of them next week. Oh, and while I remember, I've started something new. I started it last week. I'm calling it Boy Watch, and it's going to be my top 5 fighters of the month. And I'm just splicing in little bits of UFC footage or whichever company footage it is. It's not for profit. It's not monetized in any way. It's just a fun way to sort of share my opinions, because I have so many of them, as you're probably familiar by now. And, give it a look and give me a shout what you would like to see more of, what you'd like to see less of, how I can present it better. I'm very interested in how I can go about presenting that better. And buy Notorious, even though lots of places are running out of stock of it, so I think we're due another print run soon. I'm your boy Jack Slack. This has been the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 60, and I will catch you all later in the week, and I'll tell you how I enjoyed Glory. Cheers!